Thank the board for the opportunity to present our personnel budget here this evening. And I also want to thank our business office staff for their assistance in developing tonight's presentation, specifically Michael Buffamonte, Patricia Wallace, and Patrick Cahill. In tonight's budget presentation, we will take a look at staffing from the following perspectives. Get the next one. Thank you. We're going to begin by looking at district-wide FTEs, or full-time equivalent positions, that we're proposing for the 2024-2025 school year. These positions will be reviewed in two separate categories, those included in the general fund and those that will be funded through federal and state grants. We'll then provide an overview of expenditures or salaries for personnel, and then finally we'll examine the costs associated with employee benefits. On this first slide, we break down our district personnel into 20 categories. We also provide a year comparison of FTEs. You'll see that we've proposed a total of 1,122.51 FTEs for next year, which represents an overall year-to-year reduction of 6.17 FTEs. That translates to a decrease of 0.546%. We're going to discuss some of these larger changes, but for most of these categories, you will see changes from one year to the next that are relatively small and inconsequential. Most of the departments that show minor increases are due to recoding or reallocating FTEs from other departments, as opposed to adding or decreasing FTEs. Let's look first at the transportation line, because that is where we see the largest increase. The 6.7 FTE increase in transportation includes an increase related to a payroll clerk and portions of two other buildings and grounds personnel being appropriately coded to transportation so that we can maximize our eligible transportation aid. The additional increase represents additional drivers and bus attendant positions. Those are currently vacant positions that do not have runs associated with them, but we are keeping these positions in the budget to provide for the possibility of being able to bring back some runs in-house, as well as accounting for additional students with IEPs that may at some point require monitors. The other large number we need to look at is a decrease to the teaching special ed ELL line. What you see in this chart is a reduction of 7.63 FTEs. Now, this would lead you to believe that we are making reductions in the number of instructional staff working with our students. This is actually not the case. We will not have fewer instructional staff working with our students next year. We did, however, reallocate positions to address our areas of need. At the outset, our goal was to find a balance between three things: the decline in enrollment, changing needs for our student population, and our duty to be fiscally responsible to our taxpayers. All of these things needed to be taken into consideration equally. With a decline in student enrollment, we're expecting a reduction in the number of elementary sections. Positions designated for those purposes are not being eliminated, but rather reallocated to other areas. For example, we'll be adding a co-teach class at Sapphire, we'll be adding 2 E&L positions at the high school, and a special education class at the middle school. These reallocations are all driven by student need, and also by our obligation and desire to educate our children in the least restrictive environment. Your question still remains, though, so where are the 7.63 positions coming from? And that's a great question. I'm going to explain that when I explain the next phase of our budgeting process. So in order to understand this budgetary decrease, I ask that you think about these FTEs as positions and not people. In order to ensure a lean budget, we went through a painstaking yet strangely satisfying process of examining position control. That means we scrutinized each and every position in the budget, all 205 pages of data, and removed positions that we were sure did not need to be carried forward. It's important to understand these positions were vacant and not representing actual instructional personnel for the previous year. One example of this is a teacher who switched certification areas and needed to be coded differently. She was placed in a new position control number, but her previous position was not removed. It is now. We also had a few instances where teachers went on maternity leave, and we had to hire leave replacements, essentially having two people in the same position. And this is not an issue, it happens all the time. But once the teacher returns from the leave, the other position needs to be removed. It was a long process, but position control is cleaner and leaner to the tune of 7.63 FTEs. I don't want you to think that this process isn't done on an annual basis. It is. We just dug deeper this year and scrutinized every single position, like I said, over 205 pages, not once, not twice, but 3 times.
And it was a lot of fun. Just looking at the numbers.
It was fun. I want to look at a few other numbers on this slide. You'll notice a security decrease. Be assured that safety is still our top priority. We're not reducing coverage in our buildings. We do have 2.5 less dedicated FTEs for our safety officers, but we have maintained the size of our staff because there are also safety officers who are paid as vouchered subs, which I will explain in a later slide, where you will see an increase in that area. The next category I'd like to talk about is, because it is one of the larger numbers at -3 FTEs, is computer-assisted instruction. You'll see a decrease of 3 FTEs here. 2 of them are recodes to general education, and the third is recoded to central data processing, which explains the additional 1.0 in that area as well. If you look at the attendance line, you'll see an increase of 0.57. That is simply a matter of us adding a part-time bilingual registrar that goes through the attendance code. In health services, you'll see minus 2.0. Again, it's not necessarily less staffing. Last year, we added 2 RN positions because we had school nurse teachers in those positions, and it is very difficult to find school nurse teachers these days. But we were able to pick up the instructional piece of that through our special area teachers and hire RNs in the place of the SNTs. So although we added RNs last year, the SNT positions were still in there. We removed them from the budget as well. In psychological services and social work, Patrick has on a number of occasions referred to a time when COVID-related grant funding would end and we would need to absorb these positions into the general fund. That time is now. With expiring federal aid provided by ARPA, you can see an increase of 1.6 FTEs, which represents positions we need to absorb into our general budget. Okay, are there any questions so far? Is there anything you would like clarified on this slide? Yes.
Was there a reason for the increased scrutiny this year?
Yes, and that ties into the other 2 things that we spoke about. We knew we were going to go down in sections in the elementary school based on a decline in enrollment, but we also knew that we had needs in other areas, and we needed to retain those positions and reallocate them. That's why we had to dig a little bit deeper this year. And the third portion I mentioned was just being, fiscally responsible and thinking of our taxpayers. All those things came into play. And listen, in a budget this size with the number of personnel that we have, 7.63 is not a large number, but it's what we needed.
And kind of follow-up question, are we going to have it like on a more regular basis in the future?
Yeah, it was fun. We're going to keep doing it.
It seems
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know if it's going to be every year, but every 3 years or whatever.
Yeah. We actually, in the last couple of years, have gone through a process with HR, payroll, and the business office, and we all coordinate our efforts, and we do this on a regular basis. So it really was a matter of cleaning up and digging a little bit deeper, but on a regular basis, we do adjust these things, and we're in very good shape with our position control.
Thank you.
I have a question. What would be included in curriculum development and supervision? Not specifically the person. What positions are those? Is that an error question?
I think it's us.
It
I
is.
think it's Matt and I and the CNI office.
Yep, it is. It's three certificated positions and 2 clerical, I believe.
Right.
Okay.
My only question is, how does it affect class size? So realizing we have a reduction in students, and then we're reducing in some, and then reallocating, which is all great and all that, but our class sizes, I know before, were a little bit higher than, at least I would prefer.
We're actually monitoring that very closely, and we're in a very good place right now with the goals for each of our grades. Numbers are being monitored weekly.
So the reduction in thing that has, in staff won't really affect class size.
The class size numbers will not go up. That we're not expecting,
They won't go
unless we
down
have a
either.
crazy influx that we can't anticipate, we are making sure that our class sizes remain within the range that we would like them to be.
Right, so they won't go up,
It's a
but
good
they won't
question.
go down either. Or we don't know.
Where,
'Cause like, a few years ago, I thought our class sizes were way too big, right? Especially at the elementary level when you have 25 kids in a class.
Mm-hmm.
So now it seems like they're more in the 23 to 22 range, which is great.
which is appropriate.
So we've gone in a positive direction, obviously. But, like, if we're gonna reduce sections, and we're gonna reduce staff or teachers, or ELL,
So
then
the
I can see
enrollment-
that growing back up to 25, or remaining the same, you know, but the goal is obviously to continually reduce it, because our number one priority is to teach kids.
So what,
Teacher ratio is important, I would say.
completely understood, and that's a great question, and I think it's important to understand that enrollment drives the number of sections. We don't cut sections and then hope that we have the right amount of kids in there. We look very closely at our projected enrollment. We're never going to be able to, to nail it exactly, but we have a good idea of what we're looking at if we roll second into third into fourth. But we make sure that our enrollment drives our decisions regarding making those cuts. And then, once those cuts or reductions are made in sections, the class sizes are always of paramount importance, and that is something we're monitoring literally on a weekly basis.
Great, thank you.
And I think we discussed it at a previous meeting. Dr. Hassler may have said something, but our decline is really occurring more at the elementary level, correct? Than it is at the middle school and high school level?
Yes, and that's where the reductions are.
Okay.
That's where the reductions in sections are. However, even though you're having a reduction for example, 1 FTE in a building, we have a building that is adding 2 sections of a specific grade. So it's interesting, and it goes by grade, and it goes by school.
And we've seen that it's cohorts now going into 6th grade. There's a bit of a dip that's happening in 6th grade too. So it was heavily at the elementary level, but I think that slowly, we've had over the years bubbles of grade levels that have been over 600, graduating classes of 600. I think that those large bubbles, I think, are slowly moving upward, and we're seeing smaller cohorts of kids coming through, and that's slowly coming into the middle school. So it's been largely monitored at the elementary level, and I think we're going to have to keep a close eye on the middle school as well, kind of moving forward. And, each year that's slowly, incrementally moving forward. But again, it also depends on, we have kids moving out, but we also have kids moving in. I mean, registration is still busy on a daily basis. So it's, it's exactly what Lori said, just literally watching it day by day.
I think the only building is our high school that has not seen. They're pretty much stagnant. So you'll see some change. And I think, talking about the cohorts of students. But again, enrollment is, depends upon who moves into the district, when they move into the district. One of the things that I should say is that typically enrollment used to happen in August. That's not the case anymore. Enrollment is happening in September, October, November, December. We can get a large cohort of students that move in January. So all of those things are hard to predict, but I think that the budget really reflects that, in that we do have positions if that were to happen, right? We have to be cognizant of that and also look at the trends that we've had. So we have had a large cohort of students that move in, which is not typical for us. Like I said, January, December, February, and we have to be prepared for that. And I think this budget is reflective of that.
So it sounds like some elementary schools, from what Lori said, are having a reduction, but some are increasing. So I'm assuming like North Main is going up and
Yes.
CV is going down.
Yes.
But the total amount of students is going down, but slightly lower than.
Yep.
And it fluctuates between grade levels. So in one building, we aren't necessarily seeing reductions at all grade levels. We may see a reduction at 3rd and 4th grade, and then an increase at 2nd grade, for example, at one of our buildings.
So we should add crystal balls to the budget.
That, and yes, along with the weather, letting us know what the weather's going to be.
Cards maybe.
Okay, so all the positions or FTEs that we've just talked about are part of our proposed general fund budget. It's important to understand that there are an additional 34.31 positions that we are anticipating will be alternately funded through federal and state grants. We budget for these grants based on the current year, but there are small fluctuations from year to year based on federal allocations. The title grants and the IDEA grants are recurring federal grants that we receive each year. The UPK program, as you see here, will continue being funded, but the source is shifted this year from federal to state funding for 24-25. You can also see how important this funding is for our instructional staff. It actually provides us with salaries for 30 additional teachers and teaching assistants. And that's something that is not only necessary, but it's important to understand where that money is coming from. And now that we know how many employees or FTEs we have district-wide, we're going to take a look at how they are allocated. The graphics on this slide share how our human resources are allocated throughout the district and what percentage each subgroup represents in the overall personnel budget. As you would expect, the largest portion of our workforce is our instructional staff, representing over 82% of our overall staffing expenditures. We're going to look a little further into each of these subgroups and explore a year-to-year salary comparison. I'm going to start by focusing on the last line of this chart. You can see a proposed budget of $108,899,083. This represents an overall proposed increase of 3.98% for staff salaries. In each of these subgroups, you can see a percentage increase that's reflective of employee step increases and contractual increases. For example, our Monterey Teachers Association employees are due 2.25% increases next year in addition to their step increase. Our CSEA employees are due a 2% increase in addition to their step increase. So let's take a look at some of these categories a little closer. If we're looking at administration, you see an increase in 5%. As we all know, Elsie is going to be retiring this year, and there will be a period of transition and overlap with the new superintendent. This line also, that's included in this line. This line also includes potential for an increase in salary for an incoming superintendent. On the instructional side, on that line, you're going to see a 3.8% increase here, and this again is due to step and contractual increases for all our instructional staff, as well as increases from the implications of ARPA funding ending. We look at transportation, we see a 6.8% increase, and that again is due to step and contractual raises, plus recoding for a portion of 3 employees' salaries for the purpose of maximizing aid. That increase also accounts for those additional bus attendants and driver positions that we are going to be keeping in the budget and discussed earlier. The next category I'd like to discuss is safety and security. You saw earlier that we had a reduction of 2.5 FTEs. I told you that the 2.5 FTEs are not necessarily a reduction in staffing and dollar amount. What I mean by that is we are going down in actual positions, but up in expenditures. And I know that doesn't make sense, but let me explain it a little better. The increase of 6.8% represents a reallocation away from full-time safety officers and towards hiring more part-time subs. Safety officers are civil service employees, and we have repeatedly exhausted the list for eligible candidates. It's been difficult to fill the full-time positions, but we've been successful in hiring part-time subs who have flexible work schedules, and we are still able to ensure the safety of our staff, our students. And another aspect that people don't think of is, in addition to your school day, we have events in the evening. We want to make sure that our buildings are accessible and safe for our community members and our groups that use our facilities evenings, weekends, holidays, well, not so much holidays, just athletics. But the buildings are always open. You had a question?
Yeah, I do. Is it safe to assume that the part-time workers don't have to come off the civil service list?
Part-time workers do not come off a civil service list, yeah. There really is not a civil service list. We pull it and we see who we can hire off that list. We just recently hired someone, but the list gets exhausted very quickly, and then our hands are tied. So either we don't have people working, or we can employ the part-time subs.
Thank you.
So the largest percentage increase on the slide is in the other category. At 19.1%, it is a large number, but it is a very small dollar amount, less than 1% of our staffing expenditures. The category includes health insurance buyouts and vacation buyouts, and we need to make sure that we adequately appropriate funds in this area. Okay, are there any questions about this slide? Okay. When we think of staffing cost, we typically focus on salaries, but we can't forget the equally important component of employee benefits. Employee benefits or fringe benefits can be broken down into the following 6 categories that you see in this chart. Health insurance coverage for active employees as well as retirees are included here at $29.98 million. That accounts for about 55% of our benefit expenditure. Contributions to the ERS and TRS retirement systems at $12.77 million account for roughly 23% of the costs. $8.3 million, or 15% of this budget, is allocated for FICA tax, which is a payroll tax paid to the federal government. At $1.65 million, employer insurance represents a small percentage at 3%, and that includes workers' comp, life insurance, unemployment, and disability. Dental and vision is fairly self-explanatory. At $1.2 million, that is 2% of the benefits. And another 2% is other employee benefits, and that includes retiree incentives and tuition reimbursement, and that's $1.15 million. We're going to look at each of these categories a little closer on the next slide. In the chart, we've outlined the expenditures for each of these benefit categories. The overall increase is 4.9%, and that's largely driven by increases in health insurance and contributions to New York State retirement systems. As you can see, health insurance is our largest benefit expenditure. The cost increase is approximately 3.3%, and it's primarily due to an increase in premiums through the Orange Ulster Health Plan. Dental and vision is up about $100,000, and that's associated with an increase in district contributions. If you look at the line for retirement systems, you see a 7.3% increase. The increase in this area, unfortunately, is out of district control, as the rates for distribution are dictated, or contribution, I should say, are dictated by New York State ERS and TRS retirement systems. ERS includes our non-certificated, non-instructional employees such as clerical, food service, bus drivers, and safety. We expect an 18 to 19% increase in the employer contribution rate next year for these employees. The rate for TRS, or our certificated instructional employees, fortunately is only up 2.66% in comparison.
So I have a question there. And this might be more for Patrick, but if you know it, it's fine, because it's technical on the other side. The retirement system, does it not invest in the market to make returns? I don't know about anybody else, but our returns the last 2 years have been skyrocketing as far as with the market. So where does this type of a large increase, or where do they say it's actually coming from when the market itself, from an economy standpoint, I'm not talking about inflation, I'm talking about the stock market, bonds and stuff, have been performing quite well?
Definitely a Patrick.
That's an interesting question, Michael.
That was good.
So it is based to a large degree and extent on the financial markets and the return on the financial markets. But I also believe there is a moving average, a multi-year moving average that is used. I believe it's almost 5 years. So we're having a good year now, right? That would be part of like a 5-year look back or average rate of return. And statistically, it's like has a smoothing effect. So the idea would be over time. We're not just going to bounce around, hey, we had a good year in the markets, the rate can go down. Oh, we had a bad year, the rate has to go way up. Like, that's essentially what the rate does, right? Is it based on that? It's also based on demographics of the pool of people, right? People coming in, people that are retired, the lifetime expectancy, those sorts of things, those demographic elements. So there's a lot that goes into it. So theoretically, and then like if the market continues to perform well or outperform historic norms, we'd tend to see that rate go down. And it's interesting that the ERS rate is the one that's up, way up, where the TRS is relatively stable. So these are two different retirement systems that maybe have different methodologies or policies about how they adjust the rates. But I mean, I could actually look into that a little bit more deeply and report out at another meeting if we like.
It's just interesting.
It is. I find it very interesting.
I would say since the last election, the market's been very strong.
Yep.
So if you're saying it's a 5-year average, well, we're coming up to another election, so that would be 4 years in.
Yep.
So it just seems like a pretty big increase. I think it's good for the public to understand that, because these come down from, I'm sure, actuarials up in Albany, and they calculate what needs to come down.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing I would point out is we're talking about a rate, I think, and there's different tiers for different employees. So if you were just hired, you're a tier 6, there's going to be literally a different rate than somebody that's, been in the retirement system for 20 or 30 years. Would be like a tier 3 or 4. So it's actually fairly complicated to even get to the point where we're projecting these things out. But the rate itself is about, for next year, is about 17.8%. So think about that concept, that for every dollar a staffer earns ERS, we're contributing 17.8, I think it's 17.7 cents on their behalf to the retirement system. So it's a fairly good benefit, and it's, can be costly, especially when the rate is increasing like that. I mean, there were years during the internet bubble when you look at that historical rate where the rate was near zero because the market was doing so well.
Yes.
So it does go up and down.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's exactly how I would have explained it. Okay. In the next chart, we've outlined the expenditures for, did we go through this one yet?
I think we did largely. I don't know if we covered everything, though.
Okay. In this chart, we outlined the expenditures for each benefit category. The overall increase of 4.9% is largely driven by the health insurance contributions and contributions to New York State retirement. We went through these.
We got that.
Where are we now?
I think maybe other.
Oh, the
employee benefits.
35%. Did we get to that one?
No, we did not.
Okay. That's a big number. So we'll take a look at the 35% increase in the other category. As I mentioned before, this is a big number in terms of percentage, but again, it only accounts for 2% of the benefit cost. The increase in this line is due to projected retiree incentives. When individuals retire, they're typically receiving payment for unused temporary leave days, and we want to make sure we allocate some funds in that area. Okay, any questions about that category? Or that slide, I should say? Okay, here are our takeaways. It's always our goal to provide students with a quality education. In this budget, we reallocated existing instructional positions to address the needs of all students. We were able to do this with no increase in FTEs, thanks in part to our work in position control. Finally, we exercise fiscal responsibility because we need to consider the impact to our taxpayers always. Are there any questions? Keep in mind, we have another presentation.
This was us into it.
It's a good one.
Thank you.